appears that we are live. So let me check my YouTube channel. Really quickly, just to make sure that we are. Are you able to see it, Nick? All right, I have it on my screen, so I know it's live. Try and keep refreshing it. All right, sweet. Hopefully it's not too delayed. But, alrighty. So, if we go over here. Perfect. Alrighty. Let me see if, okay. I'm gonna see if people are gonna join the stream for a little bit, but in the meantime, how has your day been, Nick? How's your day been? Damn, not the car. The new car that you got? No way, bro. Aw, damn. Yikes. Alright, yeah, for me it was I remember when I had to take my brakes. I think I had to redo all four the brakes in my car. I couldn't do just the front and the back, it was all of them. Yeah, that took a lot out of my paycheck back then. But good old brilliant. Alright. Well, seems like we can just get started now. All right, the big old topic, the big kahuna today is virtual reality, which is a very but it's been a very interesting topic, especially since virtual reality is at the very nascence of its industry, right? Very early on in development. So there is a lot that is going on right now, and there's also a lot that isn't going on right now, just because there is varying differences in how much money is spent, how much research has been done in the industry, and all these separate considerations. But first, I'm just going to quickly transition to the next slide and talk quickly about what even is virtual reality. And like I said, since every single year or every single so many years, they come up with a very new version of it. So the definition tends to change over time. But I'm pretty sure that most people are in agreement that it's kind of a simulated experience that includes some form of positional tracking and like a 3D near eye display, right? That is able to immerse yourself into this reality or virtual reality that you're trying to quote step into. And it is very, like I said, interesting because there are a lot of different variations and a lot of different iterations of this that have come out. So even the early ones look very different than the ones that we have currently in the industry. So let's quickly talk about the history of it. We'll go on to the next slide. And how it all began, how it all started, where it all started, and what was the idea back in the day before it transitioned to what we know as like our MetaQuest and your Oculus and your PlayStation VR. So it had originally began as this device called the Sensorama, right? It was created by Morton Heilig in 1962. It was a mechanical device at the time. So the best description that I could give you is if you remember those like 4D cinema experiences that you used to have when you went to a theater, yeah, in like a zoo or something. That's right, yeah. If you, there was a shark or something, yep, that is the closest thing that at the time that we were able to develop with this device here, and that was the idea that Morton had was that this idea essentially what he wanted to recreate is that you were in a motorcycle, right? And a motorcycle drives through New York City. So this device held a pretty good like color display. It had fans. It had even odor emitters, a good stereo sound system, and the motional chair that allowed you to experience the motorcycle as you were going along, right? So as you went on, right, as you drove in quotations through the city, let's say you were near a bus or you were approaching a bus, right? They would administer the scent of petrol or oil as you were trying to pass it. So things like that, and also as you were driving along, right, you would hear the sounds of cars through the stereo system from the left, right, and the left as you would pass by cars, people in the background, right? And all these different scents and sounds and visuals and motions essentially comprise this entire machine to the point where I think it only had five short videos or short, yeah, just short videos that you could go through, but that was the main one. But if you can see, right, it's a pretty. I mean, for me, I don't know about you, Nate. This just looks like a regular arcade chair. I mean, that's really all it is. And it very much looks like also those when you went to an arcade and you jumped on that what's it called fake or those roller coaster simulators. Yeah, remember those? So that was also a pretty early remembrance from when I first initially saw this, or even now they call it the D box or whatever at theaters where it's you go on the seat and it's supposedly like super mechanical where you would feel all the vibrations, you feel super immersed in the movie, blah blah blah. It's basically a little bit of a scam to charge you like twice the price of your ticket to go watch a movie. Yeah. Yep. 100%. I remember. I mean, as a kid though, it was pretty cool because even back then, right? I mean, I loved I always watched the water ones. So every time that it was a water version of it, I would always go see that one, and it would always be the scene of the shark, right? When the shark's coming in, and then it like tries to butt you, and then you feel that little bump at the back of your spine that you get jolted out of your chair out of. Or it'll even include like sprays of water as you were traveling, or if there was like mist, you would feel it on your face and all that, which was annoying because I had glasses, so couldn't see shit after that. All those little things that at the beginning, I mean, that's the closest that you could ever have, or the closest that you would be to experiencing something in one place that wasn't there, right? Experience something from another place, but you're experiencing at the moment right now. So this was where it all began, where it all started. Now, kind of where we are right now, you could say that the big one was the game changer of the industry, in my opinion, was a good old, good old Oculus Rift back in the day. And this came out at around 2010, I believe, and it came out as this initially read a Kickstarter project by this man called Palmer Luckey. It was surprisingly pretty successful, right? The first iterations of it, it had a the first research project, which is called like the Oculus Rift CV1, is what it was called, and it got a pretty big backing, right? It had around 10,000 contributors to the Kickstarter project, and it also included, I think it from those 10,000 contributors, it was about $2.5 million in funding for this project, which is a lot of money in my opinion for a very successful Kickstarter. And not too long after, Facebook is like, "Whoa, how about we take over?" And they actually ended up buying the company in March of 2014 for around $2 billion, which is insane to think about because I think it's currently valued, or the current evaluation is about $3 billion nowadays, which is nuts for me to think about. But yeah, I remember when this came out, Nick. I don't know if you remember any stories, but like the first one that I ever, like I said, the first game I believe that everybody knew about was Beat Saber, right? And I know we had a chance to play that. But what other games did you remember when the Oculus first came out? Right? Yeah. Now, kind of to segue into the next question is, what were the speculations that you had coming in to trying a VR system, and in what ways did it disappoint you, and in what ways did it exceed your expectations when you actually tried the Oculus? Yeah, and I agree with you in that sense because I mean, when you put that headset on and they did the software where it simulated the field of view, right, the depth of the that you're actually seeing something really far away, but since the screen is literally at your eyeballs, right, they had to create software that was able to convert images into this field of view that would simulate what you would look at in real life, right? So it would curve some of that those visuals so that it had the sense of depth, the sense of this height that if you were to look down a skyscraper, you would feel this nauseating, uh, sense of butterflies in your stomach. That man, that's actually pretty far down, but you already know that it's just you know a picture or a video on your eyeballs. That's all it is. And when I first tried it, I mean, I was a bit I wasn't skeptical, but I thought that it was going to be a very similar experience to that 4D movie theater, right? Where it was going to be, oh, it's going to be cool. You're going to have like a little bit of feedback on the environment around you. It's going to be very minimal, like freedom, which is the word that I'm really looking for, to really interact with the environment that you're playing in. But I can say that I was happily exceeded expectations because when I first tried it on, I was like, holy cow. Like you can actually, when you move your head, it would actually move in your perspective on the game, right? And I think at the time it was only about 110 degrees of freedom, right? You couldn't really turn around too much. But just the fact that as you moved your head and you were looking around, you would actually feel as if you were turning in the game. And that to me was just a crazy experience on its own. And then once you added the actual the light sensors for your arms and your hands, and you started to like do motions, it was very responsive, surprisingly for at the time, how old that device was. And I would agree with you that some of it was a little bit janky because if you started to cross your arms too much, then that's when it started to get confused on which controller is which, and you would get into this glitchy situation of having two arms where they're not supposed to be. But yeah, that first yeah, it was actually very similar to the Wii, right? The Wii, when you would not when you would get it out of calibration and suddenly you're pointed your sword this way, but it's like inverted, and you had to recalibrate the whole thing. So yeah, actually, that's a very now that I think about it, that's a very great comparison to how the actual controllers felt. It just felt like a Wii remote, right? Where it is pretty responsive, but it had its glitches. It had its fallbacks because it would get out of sync with the motion or out of rotation, so that it wouldn't calibrate itself essentially. But I mean, to be fair though, for the price of $300 for the first Oculus, and I'm pretty sure the PlayStation VR was at around 250 actually, like just undercutted the Oculus at the time. I mean, it was a pretty fair deal. I mean, for $300, that's a pretty good snag. And I believe the PlayStation 4 at the time, I mean, it was about the same price as like this. It was about 300 bucks, about $400 for a PlayStation 4 Pro at least, like the newer version at the time when it's 2010. I'm pretty sure it was the PlayStation 4 Pro. Maybe not. Maybe that was around the time that PlayStation 4 came out. Yeah, PlayStation 4 came out at about a little bit later, so maybe not. But it was around the same price. So, but yet again, $300 back then is not the same as $300 now. So it can be a bit different. But I will always remember the Oculus as the first ever iterator of the VRs that we know now. The original classic, headset that you put on your head with this big clunky looking like a mini theater in your eyeball, the kind of scenario. But now, I mean, I don't think the design has changed too much, but where we are now, I believe that it's very similar as the other iterations of the device, but there have been improvements in some ways and an increase. The most notable is increase in price, right? Which is now we have the PlayStation VR 2 compared to the MetaQuest 2 now that Facebook had acquired the company. And they are both again very similar in price, but I believe that the PlayStation VR 2 is now coming in at a higher ticket price than the MetaQuest. And the MetaQuest varies, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But if you buy, I think it's 450 for the 128 gigabyte version, and then it's 100, and then 256 gigabytes is like the $550 version. So it averages about $500 if you try to buy one or the other. But the biggest difference, in my opinion, and I guess it depends on what experience you want to have with the game, is if you look here on the right, one has a cord and one does not. And that was the biggest complaint from PlayStation users when they first had the VR. And I remember when I went to your house, that was the biggest, because you had to buy this external box. You had to hook up that box to the PlayStation and then hook that to the box and then to the box to the device. And it was a whole ordeal, right? It's a big mess of wires, big mess of it. It just didn't work as well. And the good thing about the VR or the MetaQuest or at the time the Oculus is they didn't even incorporate any set of cores at all. They made their own in-house battery pack. That's why when you saw the previous version, it was pretty big. It was clunky because it had its own battery pack system. Now, you can argue, oh yeah, well that's significantly better, right? Because now you can turn around and you don't have to worry about cables or running into cables, blah blah blah. Which yes, that is true. However, comma the battery life on the Oculus was really terrible. I'm really sure that it could last you maybe an hour or so, and then you had to charge it back up. So even like even if you spent just a reasonable amount of time with your friends trying to play, you would inevitably have to rely on plugging it in and playing it while it's plugged in, thus retorting back to the fact that you're playing it with a wire, right? So I mean, yeah, it's cool to have no wires for the hour or so that you could play it on, but then as the battery life started to fade away, I mean, you were back to where the PlayStation is. So again, pros and cons, and I'm pretty sure the newer ones obviously have an extended life for the battery, but I do believe that eventually, right, when you're playing the VR, at least from my opinion, you're playing for pretty long sessions, especially if you have friends over. And right, and for that reason, I believe that the PlayStation VR 2, even though it has a cord, is more. You know what? You are correct. I totally forgot about that, and that is a very very good observation that I totally disregarded with the Oculus because the Oculus, for example, it did not have that option, right? You just put it on and you couldn't see the player, you couldn't see what the other user is visualizing on their game, as opposed to the VR for the PlayStation. As a player is in is playing, you could see what they're looking at on the TV screen, so you know what they're doing, you know what they're seeing, and it's pretty funny because now if you're playing a scary game or if you're playing a shooting game now, not only can you make fun of their movements, but you can make fun of why they're making those funny movements, right? So if they get scared by somebody in Five Nights at Freddy, you can laugh at them, but or if they suck at a game, you can now say, "Hey, man, you suck at this game," and that creates that competitiveness, right? That Beat Saber like competitive, like, "Man, you suck," and then you go on and then you start killing the song, and everybody's like, "Dang, this guy's good." So yeah, I do. Yeah, that's I totally that went over my head when I first started to do my research here. That you can't look at the player's perspective if you had the MetaQuest, which is, I guess, a really big drawback. Actually, now that I think about it, especially like I said, when you have a lot of people around and you want those people to not be bored, right? They just don't want to see a person just move around in a VR without you having the option to see that. But I don't know if with the MetaQuest 2 they have an option where you can display it or not. But that is, yeah. So I looked it up and it says using the MetaQuest remote desktop, you can stream your physical monitor and your computer by activating the triple monitor setup. To activate multiple monitors via VR, you can install the Oculus remote desktop on your PC and allow you to connect to the MetaQuest headset. I don't know if you have to buy it. It might be just a software that comes with the MetaQuest, or if even if you don't have it, you can download it. But it just doesn't make sense to have it if you don't have a MetaQuest anyway. But I believe it's just this external software that you can download to your computer, and from there you can start streaming your Oculus and start using it. But like I said, it's pretty cool because um, hold on. Sorry, my screen glitched out for a second. But okay, we're good. And yeah, so you can't display on the screen. It's pretty boring. Currently, somebody can't hear me in the chat, but I'm pretty sure my volume's up. I can even hear the stream from my headset. Yeah, so I maybe have to up the volume, whoever's in the chat, because I can definitely hear it. on my end. Yeah, because we can definitely hear each other pretty clearly, and I have the stream pulled up on my computer, and I can hear myself and you. Yeah, that's what we can definitely. Okay, hopefully, okay. Nick, talk. I don't know if they could hear you or not.
Hello.
Can you hear Nick now?
What is up? That's my name. I'm Nick.
All right, let us know, chat, whether you can hear Nick now. Because I think they could hear me now, but they couldn't hear you.
Mm,
So we'll
weird.
see. Okay, yeah, we good. You're live now. Okay,
Cool.
cool. Alrighty. So back to what we were talking about. We're back rolling. Oh, I went ahead of myself. So yeah, so we just talked about the game changer, which was the Oculus, right? Which is cool and all. But then you had this one, this big bad boy, that you can't display. But apparently now they said they had a workaround where you could download the software and they're able to visualize it and can get a workaround if you're trying to. I mean, I guess the biggest issue with that is probably people wanted to stream their
Mm,
gameplay from the Oculus, right? And a lot of streamers probably voted for
mm-hmm.
the Oculus because it's kind of this. It doesn't require you to get a PlayStation to play it.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
fair.
I'm pretty sure that the Oculus company, now MetaQuest, had a big push to come up with a solution to that. Because on the PlayStation side, it's pretty easy. You can just get a one of those Elgato capture cards and use that to display it on your stream, which is really easy to do, especially since you can automatically see the players and it's pretty nice. Oh, thank you, Eric. We can hear you now. Cool. Glad to see that it's working. Thank you, Eric, for joining the stream. And now we have the PlayStation. It's just coming out, I believe. It's rolling out this month. I think in the next couple of days it's coming out. But I mean, for these price tags, Nick, is it worth it? Do you think they made significant improvements from the VR1 to the VR2? Because I believe that the VR1 from the VR2, I mean, the only difference in essence is they added a better display, right? It's now an OLED display on the screen. They have added better, what's it called?
Tracking.
Tracking system for your hands. There is no longer light based. I believe it's just
Mm-hmm.
regular gyroscopic sensors that are able to calibrate themselves. I believe, and then you have again a, I believe maybe a more comfortable headset. I don't know if it's going to be more comfortable or not because they have this kind of headband that goes a little bit above your forehead, as opposed to the more standard Oculus where it had the three straps, right? The one over the head and then over the sides that looked into it. Like I said, I don't know how it's gonna feel, but it looks like they got rid of that three band standard that we've had for years at every single
Mm-hmm.
every single VR set had. So maybe it's a little bit more comfortable, maybe not. And so yeah, we'll see
The
how it looks. What do you think? Is it worth it, Nick, or not?
I think it really depends. For me personally, I don't think it's worth it right now, just because like I said, VR is such a fun thing to do with people, and I just don't have enough friends around to to like make days of it and have people over and have a go at it. And it's not something that I typically want to do a ton by myself. Like I'll do a little bit by myself.
Gotcha.
Um, but I think that if it is really a smoother system, then it's probably worth it.
Gotcha.
Um, Especially because I mean, there's been years and years of game development since the last PSVR. Like some of the stuff that they're working on and um, just improving upon is just insane. Like one game that comes to mind is I think it's called like Blades and Sorcery.
I don't think I've played that one.
It's it's just like a crazy. It's like a fighting game, but people in the modding community have just gone crazy with it. They've like put
Uh,
Star Wars mods in it and had like you have a lightsaber and you're using the Force and you're like throwing people, and it's just really cool.
gotcha.
Um,
Eric in the chat says OLED all the way. So I think he likes the fact that we're moving toward a better display. I'm not sure. I think the Oculus also has, or I keep need to stop calling it now because Facebook gonna sue me or something. But the
mhm.
MetaQuest 2 now, I believe it does have a very similar display. I think it'll be also an OLED display. But I mean, I believe. I mean, obviously, if you have the PlayStation, right, the obvious choice is just to go for the VR2 because you already
Mhm.
have it. Might as well, right? But I don't know. This is a question for the chat also, right? Maybe some of you in the chat don't have the PlayStation. If you were to get a VR set, would it be the VR2 or would it be the MetaQuest? I mean, the biggest drawback of the VR2, right? If you don't have a PlayStation, is you have to get one. You have to get a PlayStation
Oh,
5.
I definitely would. I would recommend the Meta Quest if you did not have a PlayStation. But if you already had a PlayStation, I think that the PSVR 2 is probably a viable option if you're willing to just dish out the amount of dough that you need to get it.
Right. Because I mean, the other pro that I forgot about is that the MetaQuest's portability is significantly better than the PlayStation VR's. Right, you
Oh
can
yeah.
just put the MetaQuest in your backpack, go on a flight, and then go somewhere
Mhm.
else, and you can just use it. Right, as opposed to the VR for the PlayStation. I mean, you have to take your PS5 with you, take the entire setup, and then set it up somewhere else. So in terms of that, right, if you're a big traveler, if you're a person that likes to go to different places and maybe go to a
Mhm.
friend's house or whatever, right? You obviously are gonna have to go for the MetaQuest rather than the Oculus. So it is, like I said, a pretty easy choice if you don't have anything yet, but a bit of a difficult choice depending on if you want portability or not if you already have a PlayStation. So, um, yeah, but I mean, let's talk quickly about the games, right? The games in the VR that are already out. Because the other thing that I was saying, like you were mentioning earlier, is that I would probably wait to buy the PlayStation VR just simply because I just haven't seen any big games in the VR area that have really stood out to me that I'm saying, okay, I need to get the PlayStation VR to play this game, right? The only one that I've seen from the PlayStation side is the Horizon Zero Dawn or whatever.
Mhm.
That for me, I don't really like that game in general. I I think it's a little bit of a boring side, but it's probably the only game that has exclusively been made for the launch of the PlayStation VR, so maybe it might be optimized to be playing it.
Mhm.
But other than that, it really your library is going to be composed of every single VR game that has been released previously, just upgraded to this VR2 setting. So
Yeah.
I I struggle, in my opinion, to
No,
really
yeah,
warrant,
I think that's
right?
fair for sure.
But if you've never had a VR set, though, let's talk about that quickly. All right, let's say you skipped the PlayStation VR on the PS4 and now you have the PS5. I mean, that probably means that you haven't played any of the original games, like your Beat Saber, like your Five Nights at Freddy's, um, like that the Fruity, what is it, Shooting Fruity,
Shooty fruity.
Shooty Fruity, which is a banger of a game
Hey,
if
if
you haven't
anybody
played
in the
it.
chat has a VR system and has not heard of or played Shooty Fruity because it's a weird game, you gotta get on that.
It is
It's so
hilarious.
fucking
It is
fun.
hilarious. you essentially, for the gist of it, is you're a clerk at the superstore that sells fruit, and you are having to do wield two tasks. You have to scan fruit and put it in the right location, while evil fruit starts to attack at you and you're trying to shoot it.
There's
So
like a conveyor belt of guns that floats around your head, and you have
yep.
to shoot at the fruit in the distance that the fruit monsters. Well, with your other hand, you're like beep beep
Yeah,
beep.
it is so funny. Such a cool experience when I first played that one. And what's the other one? The one when you're shooting and you're in like a in the river trying to shoot these.
Oh, Dick Wild.
Yeah, Dick Wild. That's also a very very funny game. If you haven't played it, Dick Wild is a banger of a game. Ugh. But yeah, so some of those original ones, Super Hot also another one that comes to mind that's really good VR game. I mean, you have a
Hmm.
pretty big catalog of games to play if you've never had a PlayStation VR in general.
Oh
So,
yeah, for sure. And I
so
definitely think that that would be more of a selling point.
right, yeah. Since people,
Absolutely.
yeah. But now you're talking. Okay, I want to drop 550 for the VR2, plus another what, couple $100 on games that have came out already. So you're really
Yep.
looking at a $700 to $750 investment just to even get a good use out of the PlayStation VR, and even the MetaQuest
It's
too. Because when you buy the MetaQuest, you still have to buy games with that. So
mm-hmm.
I mean, it is that's another PlayStation 5 and a couple games.
Yep.
So I think this is really targeting the upper echelon of people that are have a lot of money and they're like, fuck it, what's another
Yeah.
what's
Fuck
another
it, we
PS5,
ball.
So it's really interesting to see how this will play out because I don't think they've released any of the pre-order sales that PlayStation has already had on the VR2, and I'm not sure how the MetaQuest 2 is currently doing because I know the MetaQuest 2 is already out and it's already been selling for a while. So it's interesting to see. I'm gonna see if I can try and look it up really quickly to see what the sales are for each individual one. I know I won't be able to obtain the PlayStation ones because they're not going to release that they until they roll out the system in the next couple. I think it's this week, if I'm not mistaken. So it says that according to this article, that the MetaQuest has enjoyed a pretty substantial amount of sales. So the VR grew in sales 97% in 2021 and 242% in the first quarter of 2022 with the launch of the MetaQuest 2. Then it says announced by Facebook of the MetaQuest 2 has sold about 14.8 million units worldwide since its launch in 2020. So that's a lot of money. That is a lot of market value just in a
Mm-hmm.
VR set. So I'm not
For
sure
sure.
if the VR2 is a little bit late to come into the game space because a lot of the stuff that the VR2 has, the MetaQuest already has. But now it's two
Mm-hmm.
years later, 3 years later, right? So will it
Yeah.
will it see the sales that it wants to? I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But
Yeah. One more thing that kind of hurts uh, PlayStation VR is with consoles, it's a lot harder to get games out there. So unless it's like it has to go through a whole process of like, yes, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's fine, it's good, good enough. Like before it even gets accepted to be sold on the PlayStation Store. Whereas with like the MetaQuest, it works more like Steam, and it's like someone builds some weird gorilla game where you're jumping around as gorillas that just gets sent on through, and that's something that I've actually played, and it's pretty fun. It's like gorilla tag, and you're like jumping off of walls as monkeys,
yeah, that
and
that
then
is you're right in that the MetaQuest has a arguably bigger, more community based catalog than the
yeah.
VR does. I think VR.
Another game that comes to mind is this game called Akron, and it's basically the person with the headset is a giant tree, that's trying to like protect its golden acorns, and then there are other players on their phone through a companion app, and you're playing as these little squirrels, and you're running and you're trying to
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember playing it with.
steal
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do remember
steal
that.
the golden acorns while the tree is like swatting at you and throwing you
Yeah, yeah.
across. And
That actually is
I don't
a
know, it's just
brilliant
stuff like
game.
that is harder to find on the PlayStation VR because it has to go through such a
Workaround.
elaborate process to get accepted.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, when I first played it, I think it was you and your brother. We were playing it. I don't know if somebody
Yep.
else was there too, but yeah, I remember using that app, and that's probably the coolest way I've seen the VR be implemented with a lot
Hmm.
of people, with only one person and having to use the VR, right? Without having
Yeah.
multiple people needing a VR set. Very much similar to, I guess, like a Dead by Daylight scenario with one person is like
The
the main antagonist, and then everybody else is trying to
mm,
gang up against them. So,
hmm
really pretty cool stuff coming along with that. All right, let's segue on to the very last topic, which is what's the future of VR? What are we looking at? What are we gonna see? What are some of the topics? What's gonna happen to this whole VR in general in the future? So some of the main things that I've already seen in the industry and why I think it's going to still be a thing in the future. I don't think it's going to die off anytime soon, especially with its applicability in different fields. You can start off with the medical field, and it's very much useful a lot of times in surgeries. If you've seen the original meme of the surgery to a grape, whatever, I mean
hmm
that was done with, in a sense, a VR kind of scenario. Now you can argue that it's
hmm
mainly it's just robotics, whatever, but it still uses a lot of the aspects that a VR system uses. It uses like a display that you can look through. It uses this 3D tracking to essentially be immersed into this scenario, even though you're not there.
hmm
So a lot of that remote uh, control, which, like I said, has been in the industry for a while, but this is the closest thing to an actual, like, okay, I'm trying to transport myself and be this robot to do surgery, rather than just like controlling an airplane or like controlling like a drone or something, which could also be VR. But I think that's a little bit different because now the robot, like, you actually have two hands, right? The hands that replicate your movements. So
hmm
um, that's a pretty good utility in that regard. And a lot of the military situations are starting to come up with a lot of military training, especially with pilots and all that VR scenario where a lot of the pilots are now training in these big booths where a lot of the flight simulations are done now. And they're
hmm
pretty cool because they've gotten pretty dang far there that honestly most of the people that start off do that VR training, and then when they go out on the field and actually try their first airplane test, they're a lot better off than just willy nilly going hopping on
And
a
someone who read a book.
on a multi-million-dollar aircraft
Yeah.
and saying, "Oh,
Like, all right, you've
oopsies,
seen the pictures. You've seen the
eject."
pictures. Now go. Do it. Don't
so,
fuck it up.
so yeah, I believe that, and also not only that, but I mean, look at games, for example, like a Rainbow Six kind of scenario, where it very much
Hmm.
realistically tries to apply a lot of the tactics that regular militaries, like in the soldiers would use. So you could use that in the military to, let's say, you have data on a mission and you know roughly what the scenario is. You can recreate that scene in a VR setting and tell people, okay, this is what these are the choke points. This is where we're gonna do our entry, and you can play out various different scenarios of that by just replicating it in a VR setting, right? Instead of having to construct this warehouse or whatever you're trying to infiltrate, right? You can see the whole scope with just the VR set, and then be able to, in detail and to scale, be able to run through it and say, okay, this is what I should expect here. And so a lot of those have been in very much deep advancements in the military. And hopefully, I don't know what we're going to see out of it. We probably won't see anything because they're going to probably hold all of that information for themselves.
Yep.
And we're not going to know much about it. But
True.
that's, yeah, I don't know. A lot of stuff in the military with VR is going into consideration. Now segueing that into education, right? This is more getting and stepping into the heels of this Ready Player One society or a scenario that could virtually or could happen, right? The closest thing we've had
Hmm.
to that is this 2020 year where everybody shifted to online learning, right? Everybody shifted toward that, and that's probably the closest we've ever been to this online only learning scenario. But now you have a VR set, right? How is that going to look differently? I remember my senior year of college. One of my companions' capstone project had to deal with recreating a virtual classroom in this VR set. They had a whole Oculus thing, work with a couple of the professors and companies to recreate a virtual learning scenario where you could take notes, have a notepad and learn with this virtual scenario. So I know there's a lot of money, a lot of research going into recreating these virtual classrooms. And who knows, maybe one day that's what it's going to look like. Maybe you just, instead of going to university paying $10,000 a year and just rent and room and board, right? You just put on a headset and you just watch a professor do their lectures from their VR setting, and you can watch. I don't know how. I mean, like I said, I'm not
Yeah.
sure how that's going to play out. People are going to like it. People are going to hate it. I'm sure there's still going to be a market for in-person education, but if you
Oh
think
yeah.
about it, I
That's
mean,
never going anywhere.
but if I remember correctly, I mean, for me, I can say that most of my learning, and I don't know, maybe in the chat also agrees, a lot of the learning I did was through YouTube, right? Through other people watching them lecture on their own, right? Without having any feedback, right? You're just watching somebody else do a problem set, watching somebody else do this lecture. And that's how I learned most of the topics that I couldn't understand on the first time whenever I watched a professor live. So,
Hmm.
um, you could argue that we've already been doing it into an extent where we're not really there live. We're always learning through a textbook or we're learning through another virtual setting, whether it's another person on YouTube, whatever. But um, I don't think, especially with this newer generation, that is going to be necessarily something that people are going to push against. Because, like I said, all of the information, especially about books, especially about education, I mean, it's all always almost always free on YouTube, which is nuts. Like YouTube, in my opinion, is the biggest educational system that we have currently. Because you could go through an entire major probably on YouTube and do really well if you didn't even go to college. If you learn everything through YouTube and grabbed a couple books from like eBay that are used for like $20, you're pretty much set. That's how I learned a lot of my topics in math. I just went on eBay, looked at an older book, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we can give it to you for $30," and it's like normally a $300 book and brand new. And you go through the problem sets, go on YouTube, be like, "How do you do this type of problem?" And you'll find somewhere, some way, a similar problem, and you start just cranking them out. I don't know, Nick. What do you think? Would you like a setting where you just put on a VR set and you take notes online and you're you're seeing your virtual avatar classmates in all uniforms, or maybe they allow custom avatars. I don't know.
I don't know about that. I don't think that I would personally enjoy that just because I have attention issues and I for sure would just be like looking around at other people and just, you know,
Right.
like looking at just the effects and all of that stuff. But there is more application than even just a class of virtual reality. For example, in high school, they actually brought in, I forget I think it was a junior. They brought in these headsets that were like experimental, and they weren't owned by Chelsea. They were just being borrowed, and you put them on, and it was a simulation of the Battle of Gettysburg, and you were actually like watching people run and bullets fling around everywhere, and it was just this really cool learning experience where it just felt interactive in a
Wow.
totally different way.
Uh huh. So yeah, I think you have a really good point there. Instead of remember when you had a movie day or a day that you watched a video in your classroom, right? Instead of just watching on a big white projector, right? Just get these headsets and literally be immersed into it and have a better
Mm-hmm.
learning experience. It's actually pretty cool. I'm assuming this was in Pedlo's Civil War class.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and I believe that class on its own has a lot of good entertainment and a lot of good value in it. But
Hmm.
I mean, props to Pedlo for trying that out and then making it a cooler experience for you. Because did you have to read the book Killer Angels?
I probably, I don't really remember.
That
Was
was the
that the
only
one that
book
was
we
really
read.
boring?
It's the only book that you read the entire
Then
period.
yeah.
Okay, it just talks about that war, Battle of Gettysburg,
Hmm.
and the whole horseshoe kind of But um, oh, that's actually a pretty good topic too to do. Like um, maybe in science class, an experiment or running through different scenarios where in real life, right? Maybe doing a certain experiment or having it go wrong could potentially be very hazardous, right? Cause injury. But somebody puts a headset on and be like, well, what happens if you add too much of this chemical? Then you see it explode, right? You have a whole like sandbox
Hmm.
scenario where you can now start adding chemicals, adding all this stuff, and you're seeing the different reactions. You're seeing the simulation play out, and now you can start learning in a safer environment without
Hmm.
harming anybody. But you're learning as well. You're saying, okay, what if I combine oxygen with this metal? What if I combined nitrogen and this? What's going to happen? And you can start teaching that
Throw
way and
some
saying,
sodium metal in water.
yeah,
See it
easy.
explode.
Yeah. So now, like I said, you start asking those questions. Well, why does it explode? And then hopefully the teacher can now say, okay, this is cool that it's happening. Why is it happening? You can go to the chemical compounds. Why is this reaction occurring at this time? And why is it now an exothermic reaction where you have all these heat being expelled in a very short amount of time? So I do believe
Hmm.
that's really good, especially in science, um, to do these simulations in a safe environment. But it gives the student back the curiosity aspect of the class, which I think is lost in most classrooms nowadays.
Yeah, I would say.
Because even I think Minecraft also has its own like education system where it has I think every periodic element, and you have
Yeah.
this mixer where you can start combining elements and stuff. So I mean, it's already in this infancy, but it can definitely be improved upon, and hopefully in the future be
Hmm.
something that we can see more realistic. But do you think, I don't know, this is going to stretch, Nick, just saying, do you think we're going to get to this Ready Player One society where everybody has a VR in their home and it's like a big commodity? Do you think we're ever going to get there? Or do you think we are going to end up moving to maybe something different, maybe something more real? Or are we going to pursue
I I think
this,
that to an extent it will be real. I don't think it would ever be as widespread as it was in the book slash film.
right?
But I definitely think that it will get there as far as creativity goes and people inventing and adding, creating. It's just a matter of, I mean, even if you've seen the movie, like the thing is like, well, you kind of have to spend some time in real life too. It's like, yeah, I don't think it would ever get to a point where it would be everybody's doing it all the time
Right.
and like everybody lives only in
Interesting.
VR.
Right. Because
But
we
I
have,
definitely think that it can definitely become more mainstream.
okay. Yeah, I mean, even now that Elon Musk is creating this Neuralink, where it's really close to being an actual development, like they're actually going
Hmm.
to start doing trials. I think they've already started with monkeys, and I think the video. I mean, I have to look it up. I can't. Don't quote me on this for it being true or not. But what I was being told is that there is this monkey who is playing Pong with his mind, like the original Pong game. He's like controlling the game just with his mind, which I think is kind of wild that they're able to do that.
Hmm.
Because don't quote me on it, it's just a story I heard, but I know for a fact that they're going to start doing human trials pretty soon here. I'm pretty sure it's pretty much set together, just have to approve it and then having it being implemented on humans now. But
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, that's a scary thought. Very something that is very much out of what we thought out of our reach for a long time, but now we actually have it here almost being implemented. So maybe all these movies that have warned us to not do it are going to become true, or maybe a different branch of reality is going to emerge from this. Who knows? But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. All right. I think that's pretty much it for today's episode. Any other comments, Nick? Any
Next
other
time on
prediction?
podcast.
We were going to talk about we don't know yet, so we always
Yeah,
just come with
whatever we choose.
whatever
Sorry.
we decide to do in the
Yeah,
last two
probably within
hours.
minutes of the podcast.
Yup, and we are gonna keep doing this until we get 1 billion subscribers and 1 million views
I
on
don't
each
want to be
episode.
here for eternity, Paul.
We see you say that, but maybe by the time you're 65 or even earlier, there's gonna be something that stops you from aging, Nick. We're getting there, man. I'm telling you. And now we do this podcast forever, Nick. Forever.
Forever and ever
And ever. All right. Anywho, thank you everybody that joined the chat. Thank you for being a contributor to questions and answers. And thank you, Nick, for once again joining me in this beautiful journey of this podcast. And hopefully we have as much fun as we have had in this first 2 episodes. And next episode will always be better than the first two. So hopefully we'll talk about something cool. Maybe we'll shift it toward more specifically toward a certain game. Maybe again, just a general discussion like we've been having so far. So